I'm telling you, if you give out my name or tell anyone who I am, I'll hunt you down. If anybody I know finds out about this, they'll think I'm crazy. But I'm not. I don't want to talk about it, but I have to, you know what I mean? It was so wild that even now, I wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. My husband keeps asking me what's wrong, but I can't tell him. Even if I did, I know he wouldn't believe me. When I heard about your project from our friend, he said I could trust you to keep my identity a secret. He also said you would understand. But most of all, to let me know I'm not alone. I didn't know there were others like me that had these type of experiences. Still till this day, I really don't know what really happened. It's just too bizarre. The one thing that I can't explain is my watch and camera. That alone keeps it real. If it wasn't for that, I probably would dismiss the whole thing as a horrible nightmare. But it wasn't, was it? You want to know when the reality sunk in? That moment when I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt it really happened to me? It was a few weeks after it happened. I was in Ketchikan and walked into a little restaurant. There was an old Tlingit woman sitting by herself, minding her own business, drinking a cup of coffee. As soon as the door closed behind me, she looked up as if she was looking for someone that wasn't there, looking up and all around. She then saw me and froze. The expression on her face was like she was looking at the devil. Just as quickly as she looked at me, she turned her face away. Her stare, it was like having ice-cold water poured over me. Her expression literally took my breath away. I grabbed my coffee and went to sit by the window, trying to get my mind off the old woman and the fear I was feeling. I sat there, motionless, lost in thought when suddenly, as the old woman got up to leave, she stopped at my table and asked, "You've been touched by them, haven't you?" It was all I could do to nod my head yes. She asked if she could sit down. Again, I nodded yes. She said as soon as the door opened, she felt the presence of one that had encountered the land otter people. She told me it's rare to live through it, that it takes a strong person with a special calling to survive an encounter with the land otter people. She added that I had a strong soul, and I had been blessed with their power. She cautioned for me to use it wisely. Shocked, I asked incredulously, "Really? A blessing?" I was thinking to myself while looking at her, "You got to be fucking kidding me." I wished it never happened. Seeing my arm, she noticed the scratches that had healed. Taking my hand, she said she had seen those marks before, the marks of the land otter. It was all I could muster to reply, "Why me?" and started to cry softly. Like a grandmother, she comforted me, telling me I would be all right. There was a reason it happened, and when the time was right, I would know. We must have sat there for an hour and a half before we spoke again. Me staring out the window, not wanting to be alone. After that, we got and left. Once outside, she pressed a piece of paper into my palm and said if I ever needed to talk about it, to call her. I thanked her and hurried back to our summer home thinking it was all a bunch of nonsense. Ever since I was a child, growing up in Kansas, I wanted to be in Alaska. My desire driven by the Jack London novels I had read. But there's life to contend with. School, marriage, children, you know, one thing after another. My husband and I saved for years for that trip, to spend the entire summer in Alaska after the kids were grown. It wasn't hard to convince him since he loves the outdoors, to hunt, fish and explore. All I wanted was to just be there, you know? I hadn't planned on what happened. It was literally a trip to hell and back. Oh, the story. I guess you can tell I'm sort of apprehensive about talking about it, huh? Okay, let's get this over with. It was late July and the weather was perfect. We had some friends fly up from Seattle to spend a week with us. We decided to take a boat up to Juneau from Ketchikan for a long weekend. There wasn't any wind to speak of and the skies were clear. We were making good time and thought about stopping for a picnic lunch to stretch our legs and give everyone a chance to explore. Opposite of Petersburg, at Thomas Bay, was a dock. It was a nice dock and seemed like it was built for tourists. You know, the kind from those small cruise ships that do those excursions. It was a peaceful place to kick back and we were all excited to get out and walk around. We tied off at the dock and got off the boat. I told my husband it was their turn to serve lunch and me and my friend were going for a walk to check out the woods. There were trails going off in different directions and I chose one that skirted the woods. My friend took the one along the water's edge. With my camera in hand, I was hoping to see something interesting to take pictures of. After a few minutes, I saw a narrow path going off into the woods. It looked worn from hikers and assumed it was part of the trails. I gingerly started walking up the path and noticed a clearing about 30 yards or so ahead. I thought it must be something the cruise ships had done and felt completely safe. Stupid me. As I approached the edge of the clearing, the first thing I noticed was the absolute silence. Not a sound, not even the breeze that was blowing softly just a second before. The odd thing was there were no insects. Anyone who has been to Alaska in the summertime can testify about the abundance of insects. Standing there in that deafening silence, my mind went blank. No thoughts about anything. It was like time had stopped. Suddenly, I heard a shriek. It filled the clearing with a loud, ear-shattering sound. I was covered with goosebumps all over. It sounded like a giant bird of some sort. I was instantly frightened. It brought back childhood memories of when my two older brothers played a terrible prank on me that had me afraid to step outside for months. I was 6 years old and it was a Saturday evening and we were all in the living room watching TV. Of course, they got to choose what to watch, and being before cable existed, there wasn't too many options. They picked the Alfred Hitchcock movie, The Birds. I didn't want to see it and I didn't have a choice in the matter. I never did like scary movies because they scared me something awful. My brothers kept teasing me that these things happen all the time, birds attacking people. And I believed them. They could tell how scared I was, and by the end of the movie, my brother, Bob, got up and went to the window and pulled back the curtains. It was getting close to dark and the grackles were coming home to roost for the night. Yeah, I had noticed them before, but not like I did that day. By the time Tippi Hedren was trapped in the phone booth and getting attacked in the movie, our front yard and every tree in it was full of birds. Even the power lines were weighed down with all the birds. There I was, watching poor Miss Daniels fighting for her life, and just outside my window, the movie was coming to life. By then, both brothers were in on the act, telling me to be careful. It was just a matter of time before the birds would break the glass windows and attack us. I fell for it hook, line, and sinker. Boy, they really had me. I ran to my room and hid under the blankets. It took years for me to get over it. If I was outside, I would head back inside as fast as I could at the first sign of those birds coming back in the evenings. By the time I got to high school, I thought I was over it, or at least, I thought I was, up until I heard that sound. I closed my eyes, thinking back to those days as a child, and tried to laugh it off until I opened my eyes, and before me was thousands of birds, of every size, but they were all black. I tried to turn around and run, but my feet were frozen to the ground. I tried to yell for help, but my mouth was closed shut. I started to shiver uncontrollably with an intense fear I hadn't felt since that day in my living room with my brothers. I couldn't run. I couldn't yell. I couldn't do anything. I was at the mercy of something. What it was, I didn't know. I started to scream inside my head to wake up. It was just a dream, but no matter how many times I kept saying it, the birds not only remained, but they multiply. Then I hoped and prayed they wouldn't attack me. I kept thinking it's all a bad dream, that they wouldn't attack me. Then, like a gust of wind from a northerner, the birds took flight and started to swirl around me. There was so many of them, they blocked out the sunlight and turned the sky turned black, just like the birds. And I still couldn't move an inch. I began to pray, please don't let them attack me, please. Then the real hell began. I could feel them pecking at me. At first it was little pecks, pulling my hair and sweater and jeans. Then it escalated. I could feel my skin being torn from my body and blood started to pour down my arms and legs. Suddenly, I was able to move. The birds were so thick, I couldn't run. All I could do was fall down to the ground and cover up the best I could while batting them away. I kicked, I screamed, I fought, hoping and praying someone would hear me. The pain was unbearable, but nothing compared to having my eye gouged out. It burned like hell. My body felt like it was on fire. By now, I'm screaming, "Please God, save me," over and over, but the searing pain overcame me and I was lost in a hell that words cannot describe. It continued for what seemed like an eternity. The next thing I felt, I was floating out of my body. I was maybe 15 feet above my body, looking down at nothing but an indistinguishable carcass that once was me. There were still a birds left, picking at what flesh they could from the bones, already gnawed to death. The remnants of my tattered clothing was scattered around the carnage, torn to shreds. Nothing much was left that would prove I was ever there, much less that it was a human. There was no sense of being calm, no sense of peace, only pure terror and insurmountable fear. I continued to pray when I heard a voice. God isn't going to save you, which added to the misery I was in. Dante's Inferno didn't have anything on me. The voice called out again, "You are forsaken. You can come with us or stay here." I was in a state of horror and panic. I had no idea of whom or what was speaking to me. I looked up to where the voice was coming from, and there was this bird thing the size of a man. It had the head of a bird, and except for the beak, it looked like a human face. The mouth was curled up. It looked very strange. I thought I had died and was in hell. I don't know what happened as I lost it big time. My fear was replaced with anger and a hate that I had never experienced before. I unleashed on that damn thing with everything I had. I cursed it and everything under the sun. I'm ashamed to admit to this, but when I tell you I cursed everything, I mean everything. You know what I mean? At that point, I figured, hell, if you're going to leave me here, then fuck you too. The more I raised hell, the more the bird demon laughed. Then my grandfather appeared. He had been dead for over 30 years. He looked at me and said, "We'll meet again." I told him to fuck off too. I was beyond pissed. I still worry if I'll be forgiven for that outburst. Like a blast of blinding light, suddenly I was back to where I was standing before the nightmare started. I looked at my arms and legs. Everything was intact, except for my arms. They were scratched, and my watch, it read 3:30. I freaked even more, thinking I had been there for hours. Then I heard Betsy call out to me. I turned around and she was right behind me. It was all I could muster to say, "Thank God you found me." The look on her face was utter confusion. Then she replied, "Dear, I've been right behind you all this time except for the moment when you went around that big tree." "Oh dear, did you trip? Look at your arms." I asked her what time it was, and again, she looked at me like I was crazy. She said, "We just got off the boat." Looking around, only then did I notice that we were on the main path, no clearing, only a narrow path going nowhere. I told her I wanted to get out of there and turned around to leave when I noticed my camera on the ground. When I bent down to pick it up, I accidentally pressed the shutter button. By then I didn't care, I just wanted out of there. When we got back to the dock, I asked my husband if we could load up and get the hell out of there. He could tell I was upset and wondered what was wrong, but knew better than to argue with me. Before he could open his mouth, Betsy told him I tripped over a limb and was startled. I suggested why don't we just go across the Sound and eat in Petersburg, but either way, let's just go. On the ride over, I looked at my camera. The pic I accidentally took had a timestamp. It was the same time as my watch. 4 hours had passed, but according to everyone, only a few minutes had gone by. I could understand maybe the watch being off by 4 hours, but not the watch and the camera both. I think I was in a state of shock and confusion. I didn't say or eat much when we finally sat down for a late lunch. I sat there trying to make sense of it all, as to what had transpired. We ended up spending the night in Petersburg. The next morning, we decided to forget going to Juneau and head back to Ketchikan. It wasn't till much later did I learn that we had docked at Thomas Bay. I learned over the years of the stories, people who claim to have similar encounters like mine. In trying to understand what happened, I discovered the mythology of the Tlingits. They have stories of this shape-shifting creature called the Land Otter Man or Kushtaka that can appear as a dead relative, friend or foe, or even as your worst nightmare. One thing I'll tell you, I'll never go back to Alaska, nor be on a boat or go into the woods, ever. My ass is staying in the city. It was like taking my worst fears and nightmares and feeding them back to me. Whatever it was, I have no desire to see it or experience it again. Now, tell me, what the hell does it all mean?